let's get in and stop wasting time. For those of you who don't know, I already have my intro, but you can connect with me there. I think my links were posted in the chat as well. So find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or send me an email. I'm always happy to chat and answer your XD questions. For those of you who don't know what XD is, it is a user experience design platform from Adobe. So it's just like Sketch and Figma. It's in that world. But there's some bonus features in XD that to me really make it stand out. And I may be biased now, but I switched from Sketch to XD a couple of years ago because of many of these features long before I was working with Adobe. So you can trust me on that. And we'll talk about some of these. These are really some of the standout features to me that we're going to talk about today. Now, if you want to learn more, we only have an hour and a half. That is a brief amount of time. Like was mentioned, check out previous talks, but there's also a number of different learning resources. So right now you can check out letsxd.com. It's got a ton of different guides and resources that you can check out. We're working on a whole new version of this. I'm not sure on timeline yet, but it's going to be chock full of a lot of videos, resources, just a bunch of good stuff. So stay tuned for that. You can also check out XD Ideas. So if you're new to user experience design, UI design, research, this has a lot of awesome content from the community that's written. So you can learn pretty much everything you need to know about UX design and research from XD Ideas. And that's just XD. I can't remember the URL. I'll send it out after, but just Google XD Ideas and you'll find it. I don't want to give wrong URLs out. And then, of course, Behance. So if you're looking for inspiration, there's a whole XD kind of catalog of awesome designs. You can see this cool glass one on the right. So definitely use that, share it. We might be looking at some future contests too, leveraging Behance. So stay tuned for that. And then if you're a student, the Adobe XD Experience Lab is also another great resource for learning. So tons out there. You can Google any of these. And yeah, there's endless opportunities to learn. And definitely keep checking out UX Wizards because they've done so many awesome XD events. And so with that, let's dive into XD. We already covered the awesome preview capability, but I love mentioning it because I always do presentations in XD. So to start off, I want to talk a little bit more about components and component states. So you're going to notice the first couple of things I'm talking about here don't seem necessarily too advanced, but I want to set the stage and kind of give you the building blocks for what you can create in XD using these pieces. So we did talk about components and component states last time, right? This is how you can kind of create toggles, make these reusable elements that you can use throughout your design. So if I open up right here, I have an iPhone library. It's these things, right? Great example. It's these things. So reusable elements that I can just copy and paste, and they're going to stay in sync as I make changes throughout my design. And so these are all a whole bunch of different components I can just drop in from the iOS library and start using them. Now, components are similar if you've used Sketch to symbols or components in Figma. They are a common thing. What's not common is the idea of states or variables. So you notice up on the right here, and I'm going to try this. Let me know if the zoom thing works or not today, or if it's just a blank rectangle. Is that working? Judging by faces, it's not. So I'll just skip ahead. You can see here, there's this list of variations. And so as I click through them, you can see this button changes its look. And so this is one example of how you can use component states to build one single reusable element. Oh, it does work. Awesome. And this is just great because now I can build one element. This is my Add to Siri button. And then all of its different variations or styles are contained within. So even as I go to a dark mode or a light mode, all those are in here. And so I can just drop that. I don't have to go find each variation. It saves me a lot of time. It does take some time up front to set it up and know what you want to include. And part of that is people use components in different ways. So some people will use this to document different types of a button. Some will use it very extensively and jam a lot into component states. The best is when you use it kind of on a button like this. I would even say you could probably separate out the light and dark modes just to keep it a little bit lighter and easier to work with in this menu. But this unlocks a lot of opportunities because not only can I just toggle between these, if I'm actually using states, I can prototype between them too. And so we're going to get to that shortly. But keep that in mind that states in XD are tied into prototyping. Everything is built with the idea of going from design to prototype all in one. So you're not designing it and then linking them together later. I can actually connect triggers onto these elements and link it to another state of that same element, which is really cool. So I love components, and I will talk your ear off about them. But today, yep.
Hey Matt, it looks like someone just asked. Just want to just ask this before you hop on to the next one. Does XD allow for Figma level real-time collaboration, or are there any plans for it?
Yep. So up in the top, again, if you weren't here, this is running on a cloud document. So there's cloud and local documents with XD. And you can see we also have document history, handy tooltips. But if I just navigate over to the right, you can see this invite button. So I can invite people to a document. And when I do that, down at the bottom, I can enable a feature called co-editing, which is otherwise known as real-time collaboration. And so once I do that, anybody I invite to the document will be able to join me in real time. And I was just doing this today with my manager. We were working through a document because we kept talking about it and not knowing what each other was talking about. But then we just share a document and we can get in there and edit just like in Figma.
That's really nice. That's good to know.
Now, it is important to note, you should make sure you're on the same version of XD. That's just one little catch, but I mean, updates are always happening, so it's not hard to be on the same version. So here's another example from, correct. Yeah, for co-editing, you need to be able to invite them by their Adobe ID. We can touch on sharing closer to the end, but definitely go back to the first one because I think we covered it in detail there. And there's a lot of sharing options for just sending out the link and people can check it out. And yes, it does need to be a cloud document. Otherwise, they'd be scanning your computer to use the document, and that just doesn't work. So all the Figma files that are shareable are also cloud documents. So looking at components, again, here's another example of Siri with all these different orb states. So you know that if you use an iPhone, when you open Siri, it kind of does this little animation and moves through. So that's what this allows us to kind of use. We could technically animate between these states if we wanted to. So this is just a simple example of states where you have, different variations of the same thing, and you might be animating between them. So buttons are typically in this category too. Here we have, and I'll zoom in because I'm realizing this is probably very small for everybody. Here we have a component, and this is a link component, again, to my iPhone library. And within it, I have several other components. If I can find them, here we go. So here we have this list element that builds this module. And within it, I have two states. So this is how I can toggle the different colors. So I have all my standard kind of light text and then my destructive text. And so I can easily use that same element because when you look at it, they're all the same. They have text and they have an icon on the right. So why not build that all into one component and just toggle some of the characteristics of that back and forth? Okay, I'll get to that question in a little bit. So with this, what I can do is I can build that single component, right? This is one element. with the default state, I can define that this is just text and this is an icon. And within it, I can place more icons. So you can see I'm actually 3 levels deep. I have this main component, we have this subcomponent, and then I have another component within it. And what this allows me to do is easily override the component element of it, right? Like editing text is simple. So maybe I want to change this to save and this to copy. We know there's a better way to do this, but for demonstration purposes. And what I can do is, because I named my icons a certain way in my document assets, I have my icons saved out. And so I can just come in, select this component, drag my save icon over and replace it. And it's going to take over that component. I can do the same now for component or copy. Just drag it in and replace it. And ideally, I would set these up so that they were the same size icon, mostly for exporting purposes and just consistency. XD does allow you to kind of adjust the size on each instance. So that's why they're changing size a little bit, because I didn't set up the icons properly. But you won't do that. You know better than me. So now we've just overridden these components, and because they're the same thing, I can easily swap them out. And what if I switch this over to destructive dark? Well, it's set up. I need to override the text. So I'll say that save. This is a terrible example of destructive text, but that's okay. And I'm going to just drag in this copy. I didn't make that a component. So I'm going to just drag in the save icon, replace it. And you'll notice it's white because I don't have anything set up for that. But if I wanted to, I could easily come in and set states for my icons too. So here I could say destructive state. And I'm not sure which red that is. But now that I've set that on the main component, remember we have mains and instances, I can come back to where I've dropped that icon in and just toggle the state over, and now it's in its destructive state. And I've updated the defined destructive state here. And so these are all instances. And whenever you update your main, you can define your states on the main component, and then you can override them just like you could any other component. So that makes setting something up like this really simple. These are all just a list of the same component with overrides. Yeah, so that's a great example. Thanks for the segue. Actually, quick detour here before the segue. You can even use this to animate little icons. Out of the box, the hover state is a nice little state for hovering over an element. So here I have a default state and a hover state defined. Thinking about this, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this in preview mode because it's so small. But as I mouse over this little recycling bin, now I can get a nice little animation where the lid pops up. Yeah, cute. I should have made it bigger for this demonstration. That's okay. Anyway, on the idea of buttons. So there's a few different ways. And what I was talking about earlier is people set things up differently. So I've worked with a bunch of different enterprise teams, and they all leverage components differently. So some of them, they've built one widget that's like this, and maybe the icon changes a bunch. And so they've set up like 80 plus component states. I don't recommend that. That just becomes really hard to manage. And you really don't need to do that. So like I showed with the icons, if you set your icons up to be the same size and all of them are in your component library, all you need to do to swap something out is to just drag it over and replace it, right? And I can just keep doing this and I replace it. So the two ways of going about setting something up like this is you could either have kind of light mode and dark mode for everything. You could have with icon, without. You could go that far, or you can set it up more intelligently so that you don't need these variations. You can just add and remove things. And so what I actually recommend with icons, you can see here, there's one with a tail without. So you're just changing a characteristic of that. That makes it really easy to adjust. But with buttons and icons, And let's just say, we'll just rebuild this. So I'm just going to do a simple version of this. We're going to take this icon over here, bring it to the front. We have something called content aware layout, which we talked about last time. And so with that, I can actually build my buttons so that as content is added and removed, it'll just adjust for me. And so I'm going to make this a group and turn on stack. So stack just lets me reorder things. So great. Now I can just quickly swap these things. Don't have to worry about measuring pixels. Now I can make another group, and I'll bring this into the center. So I've made another group here, and now I can do a horizontal stack. So this is going to be my button content. Realizing this isn't a button, but that's okay. So now I can easily swap my button alignment. I can change the text alignment of these if I want to, but it's just a drag and drop, and I can reorder the content in my button. Now, I have that content set up. I'm going to make one more group, grouping the content with the background of the button. So this is going to be my button thing. And now that I've done that, I'm going to turn on padding. And that's going to measure the distance between this inner content and the background, just like this. So now as I adjust things, if I extend this name, let's make sure this is the right text box. So if I extend this name to be longer, now I have an adjustable button that's going to resize as I change text. And what happens if maybe I eliminate this button? It's going to resize for me too. And what happens if I copy that button, click in, and paste it? Well, it's going to resize and adjust for me too. So I don't necessarily need variations for all of these. I can set them up, but I can also simply delete things and add things. Now, if I don't want to delete something, I just want to hide it from this version, I can come over to the layers panel here, right? And just hide and show that button. And that's going to do the same thing. So I can keep it within the component and just hide it from visibility. And now I essentially have a whole new element that I don't need to necessarily set the state up for.
Hey, Matt.
But
we have a question from Stephanie, and I'm actually curious about this too. Are the shortcut keys the same in XD as they are in Sketch or Figma by any chance?
So there's going to be some similarities. There's also some differences. XD's in an interesting spot with shortcut keys because it kind of plays with Sketch and Figma. And so users are kind of used to that, but it also plays with Photoshop and Illustrator. And like that's its history, right? That's Creative Cloud. And so you'll find a little bit of a mix. It's probably more aligned to some Illustrator shortcuts, but there is some crossover in thinking with Sketch and Figma. So the interface is really nice. You can pretty much hover over any element and you can see the shortcode in brackets, shortcut. I'm not sure if popovers are showing up for you. But all of these tools on the left, a lot of the navigation, you can see in the tooltips, it'll give you the shortcut key as well. So it might take a minute to learn some of them, but even these tabs here have hotkeys. I'm actually in the middle of writing a guide to hotkeys, so that'll come soon. Question's a little early for me. But
sorry.
Yeah.
Just
there are some differences.
I know it's a little early, just a tap on that one. I know with Photoshop, you can create your own hotkeys. Is that possible with Adobe XD too? Like a personalized?
No. So, I mean, there's the built-in controls in Mac OS where you can map to some menu items. I think most of the menu items are defined with shortcut keys. Right now, the kind of mindset behind XD has been, we've been avoiding any kind of properties control or property settings. You can tell we've done our best to stay as lean as possible compared to certain other tools in the family that may be seen as bloated. And so there's very critical thought going into how and when we introduce things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some ways around it with like Better Touch tool. I have a gaming mouse that's connected to a lot of hotkeys. So that's how I'm moving around doing things pretty quickly. So there's different ways to do it, but it's pretty much as is.
All right. Thanks for that one, Matt.
No problem. So that's an example of nested elements. What you saw up here was nested components. And so there's been some updates to that, I think just past max or at max, in how these behave. So now if you make anything within a component itself, it'll automatically become an instance. So it's not going to be a main component. It's just going to be an instance. So you can override it within that other component. And it also supports states. So you can have multiple hovering components within a component now. And so, for instance, if I copied this and maybe pasted it into this one, what did I do there? Oh, guess I copied two. So now that this is in here, I can play this and that same little animation is going to apply nested within another component. So there's different ways to do it. Again, you could set each of these as different states within a component, hide and show your layers. But with stacks and padding, it makes it really easy to adjust things and override things, even if they're in an instance. So I recommend putting kind of as much as you can into the default state that you're going to need, and then hide and show it through the individual states. It also makes it nicer for prototyping between the states because you can get some subtle animations. So if this was kind of positioned behind and a zero opacity, you could get it to kind of animate in as it appears. So hopefully that answers the anonymous question. Now, I can address the breakpoint thing now. Yeah, so right now, designing different screens for different breakpoints would need to be separate breakpoints or separate artboards. There's ways around it using apps or plugins like Anima, where you can define breakpoints and then preview that in like an actual resizing window. But even for that, you're selecting 3 different artboard sizes. It's definitely something the team is looking at and thinking about in terms of like, how do we make more dynamic design environments? But today, things like responsive resize are going to be your best friend. So let's see if any of these are set up. They should all have automatic responsive resize set up. Yeah, they're on auto. So what this will do is just allow me to quickly resize elements. Here, I actually want this to be fixed to the left. And so as I resize things, my elements are going to adjust. So this works pretty well across full page designs too. Sometimes you just need to go in like I did and tweak the positioning because it's trying to do it all automatically. It's usually like 80 to 90% accurate. So it's really easy to copy a design or even a component and adjust the size of it. So say I want to design this component for a smaller or a narrower column, and this one's going to be longer. Because they're components, I can still keep them in sync and have them adjusted for different screens. So if I came in, I'm going to have to edit this in another document. But as I edit this, if I change properties about the photo, text style, colors, all of that will carry across, but I've just resized the element to fit into different contexts. So that's a good way around it. Even though you do need 3 different artboards, responsive resize makes that much less painful. Kind of like the loading of this giant library. So here you can see I have this element. And so if I go in and change this fill so that it's not an image, save it. Oh, this is a library, so I'm going to have to publish it too. So I can just update my library, and then you'll see the changes will be available over here. You can see by this little blue dot and the blue link here. So if I click on the blue dot, I can say update all. And now that changes there. Obviously, if these were local components, which I should have made them, that would update much faster. And as I resize it, all those changes are still going to appear. But yeah, I think it was mentioned, check out the last video. We do talk about it a bit more. And I can come back to the exporting closer to the end as well. Okay, and I do want to move on to some good stuff. So if you do have more questions on component states, we can dig into that at the end. I do want to talk a little bit about masking because it allows us to do some cool things with auto animate as well. So here I have just a basic text image. Now, before I want to do any masking with text, I can't do it with just a text box. I do want to convert it to a path. And so to do that, I'd go to Object Path and then convert to path, or Command 8 on the shortcodes. Yeah. So now I have a path. As I click in, I can manipulate that path. And if I want to, I can drag in different assets. So go back to my trusty sushi. You can see I just dragged it into that path and it auto-filled. So if I double click, I can open it up, kind of adjust the text how I want, and then I get a cool sushi mask. The downside to this is I can't go back and edit the text, but I can easily just undo the mask, change the text, and then reapply it. And so if I did that, my image is already going to be on the canvas. So I'll show you the other way to do that. So if I just, I don't actually know how to do that from menu, just hotkeys. So you can do, hold on, go to the layers and then hop into your mask. And then from there, oh, what? Just delete the whole thing. Start again. So if you already have an image on the canvas, like this, to mask this, so if I place this here and just another hotkey, I'll just call them out when I think about them. Command Shift and square brackets allows you to relayer elements or change the level. So super handy. So now I can once again go in, object, path, convert this to a path. And just like in Sketch, I can select the two layers and then go mask with shape or Shift Command M. And then just like that, I can do the same thing. So whether I'm dropping it into a mask, this way will give me a little bit more power over editing. You can see I actually have an image and then a path versus before I just filled the path. So it was actually kind of a fill, not a true mask. And so in this one, I can go in and delete the image, change it, or delete the mask, and then just get left with an image, and then easily adjust the text. And then masking objects works in a very similar fashion. So I can drag them over. I can Shift Command M, or I can use these Boolean operations up top, not on components. So if I unlink that, now I just get a group. So I can drag that ellipse in, and then just like that, I can use these Boolean kind of addition, subtraction, difference, and intersect. So you can do some really cool things with shapes this way as well. That's all the time we need to spend on masking. Now we'll get into scrolling tables and charts. I can't remember if I included this example last time, but this is one of my favorites. There's an article on this on Let's XD. Actually, there's articles on probably all of this now on Let's XD. But here we have a nice dashboard. I have kind of a fixed scrolling setup so that the content scrolls through, and then I can have my menu on the left. But what I want to do is bring these charts and tables to life, you can see I have a scrollable map here. So if I use my mouse, I can explore the map. And then the list below it also scrolls. So when you have more data than you have space, you can easily create this scrolling view. Same with all of these tables. This one we're going to look at, I'm scrolling on it right now. And we're going to create a little scroll to bottom trigger on this. And then you can also create frozen columns. So here, the left column's frozen, really good for big data sets that extend out wide. And now you have a way to do them. So I'll touch on that. We're going to start with this line chart though. So you can see it's pretty complex, and this is going to be a great example of responsive resize for you as well. So we have all of our different data points. We have lines, we have grid lines. And so it's a pretty complex chart as far as design elements go. So if I dig into this, you can see in my scroll content, I've already defined what I want in that. I've created a group just to contain everything. And so this is my months along the x-axis and then my chart grid behind it. So I've grouped everything, and my graph lines are right here with all their dots. So you can see all the ellipses and then just a vector path. And so what I can do is I'm going to take that scroll content and just say this was a much longer, or we had a lot more data than we have space to show, and we want to spread out the data points. I can just grab on this. You can see how responsive, I haven't toggled it on. This is just automatic. It's going to resize and grab that chart and do all the resizing for me. So all the grid lines, all the labels are all lined up perfectly. And I promise I did nothing to set that up. That's out of the box. And so now I have this really long chart. And I want to be able to just keep it within a certain view on this graph. And so this is another example of where if you're changing page sizes, the data you can show is going to change as well. So once again, I'll take that scroll content group, and I'm going to come over here to the transform section and just select the horizontal scroll group. And now I'm going to get two handles. You can see one's on the edge of the page here, one's over here. And whoops, if I just drag this handle back inside, and here I can use grid lines if I want. I can drag in kind of a smart guide just to make sure I'm lined up, but I eyeballed it well. And so now that's my scroll area. So now the chart kind of looks like it did before, but with less data. And the last thing I'll do is just preview this. So now I can just take my mouse, one artboard, and just start sliding it over and seeing the other data included, which is pretty slick. I can make this take it one step further though, and now add in some gradients on the edge just to make it look like it's got some depth to it. So I'll just drop this in, set my gradient colors. I should probably match that to blue. And hide the border. So just like that, I can add kind of some axis depth. You can adjust the size of it. Then I'll swing it over and just flip it right here. So now just like that, I've got this nice graph. I can use my scroll wheel. I can use a trackpad, things like that. Yeah, bring gradients back. So that's line charts. Super easy, responsive resize, lifesaver. Let's pop down to this chart here. So you can see I've already set up the scrolling on this one. If I click in here, I have a scroll group. If I turn that off, you're going to see I just have a long repeat grid. That's not that long. Let's make it longer. I have a long repeat grid of content that's all creatively named about the same thing, because that's not the point. So if I select that repeat grid and turn on the scroll group, I can adjust my scroll area again. And because I set padding up, you can see that 16 measurement at the bottom. It's because I have padding set up on that chart or table, so that as I resize it, the whole background is going to resize with me. So now I can place it, and just like that, I can scroll through that table. Now, what if I have a really, really long list of content? and I want to be able to scroll to the bottom of it. There's a few different ways. You can do this over two artboards too, but I'm going to take this with my really nice scroll to bottom button for demonstration purposes only. And I'm going to, I'll group that, and then I'll group it into this card as well. And for this, we're just going to make a component. So I'm going to use Command K. I've set up a main component. And what I'm going to do is set this button as a trigger to go to a new state. So in the default state, the table scrolled to the top, and I'm going to add a new state called bottom. And what I can do, if I pop over to prototype mode, I'm getting buttons everywhere. If I go to prototype mode, I can just click on this button and then use a tap and auto animate and then select a state. So I don't need to select a new page. I can just go to default state. That was silly because I should be doing that on the default state. So go to the default state. And from here, again, I'll click on this and just go to the bottom state. Now we need to define the bottom state. So with that selected, just like a keyframe, pretty much, with it selected, I can affect the properties, and that's what it's going to be like. And states use auto animate to transition between each other. So now I'm just going to double click into that scroll group until I find the repeat grid. And using shift to lock it into the y-axis, I'm just going to drag it up and reset the scroll position within the scroll area. So now I have this, and I have the default state bottom. That doesn't look like a huge difference, but they are different rows, I can promise you that. And so now when I play it, I'll set it to the default state. And so I can scroll around, or I can just come in here and say scroll to bottom, and it's going to scroll down and take me to the bottom of the table. And I already hooked this up, so it will scroll to top. I could change the text if I want to, but for simplicity, we'll leave it like this. So just like that, you can kind of impact and animate the scroll groups within a table as well.
Hey, Matt, we have a question. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. Stephanie has a question. How are you able to scroll horizontally on the grid here? I know you've been doing the vertical scrolling.
Yeah. So in this case, what I've done is, and this is where it kind of takes some care figuring it out depending on your use case. So check out the article for sure. I think there's a video. But in this case, the grid lines are all fixed because they don't need to move. And what I've done is I've locked some layers of this, the grid lines, and then I have an independent column here, and I've set up a separate section that's going to scroll horizontally. So you do want to set it up slightly different to achieve this, but all I had to do on the right, I went with that vertical scroll, just like the chart at the top, instead of I went horizontal instead of vertical. And in here, this is just another group that's spread out and stretched past the chart. And then I scroll group it in, pull it in, and then it previews. And to scroll horizontally, you can use two fingers and slide right and back on a trackpad, or if you hold shift while scrolling a scroll wheel, that's how you can horizontally scroll web pages, anything on your computer. So that's how you can just interact with that.
Oh, by the way, Matt, just to clarify, Stephanie's question is actually, she's asking for how can users get signifiers for it to do the horizontal scroll?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of users tend to miss it.
Yeah. So there's different ways. The gradient was kind of a weak attempt at that. I also did pretty bad gradients there. But you could use gradients. You could use little arrow indications. So sometimes when you're looking at a web page, you can see a little like indicator to scroll down. You can also use that to the side. Common technique is when you set it up, perhaps you can kind of fake hide data. So you can set it up so that your data is intentionally partly off the screen. And that indicates like, oh, this isn't the full picture. Maybe I need to pull this way or that way. So that's kind of one hack of enticing people to scroll or find out more content. Of course, user test it in your own context, but those are some suggestions. And then, okay, I think we're good on scrolling. If you have any other questions, feel free to bring them up at the end. Here's one more example. This is like a little fleet manager UI where we have a full map interface with all these different elements. Components are built in with hover states, and they all work within the scroll area. So once we get to the end, I can go through that in more detail if you're interested. But let's keep jumping to drop-down menus. So this is a big one that pulls together component states and components and stacks and padding. And there's a few different ways you can build drop-down menus too. We're going to go through and show you how to build a simple one that can basically be used for everything, including prototyping and including links. So in this case, we're just going to start with a basic dropdown with some menu items that can be overridden. So to start, I'll take my dropdown menu element here, and I'm going to group that. Name doesn't necessarily matter. Dropdown trigger. And then again, I'll make it a component. This is my main component. And so I'm just going to go and add a new state. And this is going to be my expanded state. Now, before we go and do anything else with that, essentially what I'm going to need to do is copy in this content into my drop-down menu. And there's a few things to think about as you're doing this. One is, do you want this to be overridable? You probably do if you're using a component. And then how do you want this to resize? Do you want this to be dynamic with the drop-down menu and adjust with the text or not? So we're going to make this one adjustable with the text. It might look a little odd depending on how you have your drop-down menu set up, but these are all things you can kind of play with. So here, I know I'm going to want the auto width text area. So there's a few different ones: auto height, auto width, and fixed size. For this, we'll use auto width so that the text expands as it gets longer. So we'll set those up all to be auto width, which they are. And now we'll just group this. So I'm going to group this and call this my drop-down content. I'm not going to spell it right. That's okay. And here I'm going to turn on padding. So this is again going to calculate my difference between the inner content and the background. But what I probably want to do first, you can see this is already kind of identified these as a grouping, but I'm going to make it an explicit group and call this list items. What I can do with that is now turn on stacks and easily adjust my menu items like we saw before with the button. But what this also allows me to do is delete menu items and have the drop-down resize, or add items. So now that I've done stacks and padding, I've now made this dynamic drop-down menu that I can use no matter how many menu items I have, and easily work with it in XD. So now I have that. I'm just going to cut that out, and I'm going to come back to my default state. And I'm coming back to the default state because it works like a main component in that things you add to it get pushed down to these states. So if you add something in a state, you might have a bit of a hard time going back and adding it. You might get duplicates. So always start with the default state. You can always hide it from individual states. So I'm just going to double click in and hit paste, and paste in that menu we had. So now I'm going to pull that in, maybe set it to about 8 pixels down. And this is my default state. So this is how it's going to look. It should look the same in the expanded state and the default state. But I'm just going to take this and kind of slide it up and make sure it's in behind. So again, using square brackets, I'm just going to drop it behind my drop-down menu. I probably shouldn't have made these transparent. And I'm just going to turn down the opacity so it kind of slides in when this is clicked. So that's my default state. In the expanded state, I'm going to select that again, pull it back down, turn up my opacity. And now you can see as I toggle through, those are my two states. In expanded, I'm also maybe going to just rotate this a little bit so it gets a little animation. And now I can come to the default state and immediately go into prototype mode. And this is the thing I like about XD so much, is that I don't have to kind of design and then go link and then come back and fix things that don't work in prototype. It's just a matter of tabs. And again, I can tap on this, go to expanded state. It's going to auto animate for me. So now when I play this, I can just click on it and it's going to slide down just like we intended. And if I come back to the expanded state and make this a trigger again, I can go back to the default state. And now I have a full toggle in my drop-down menu. And now I can just copy this out and have a new one. So maybe this is going to be, oops. Make sure you get your text alignment right, because it can actually have a pretty big impact on how things function for good and bad. Sushi options. So again, if I was smart, I'd either want this as fixed or I could make it dynamic by using padding. We'll leave it fixed because I messed up and did that. So sushi options. And now I can go in and, oh, this is going to test my sushi knowledge. Set those to left aligned as well. You want center aligned if you want it to resize kind of both ways. But if you're going to use, if you want this drop-down menu to expand to the right as text grows, use left alignment. If you want it to expand the other way, use right alignment. So those are some important things to know. If you're building a menu that's going to resize as text changes and it's right aligned, I would right align the text so that your buttons grow in the right direction. So if we say dragon roll, tempura, rice, and then maybe I don't have a fourth option for this, so I can just delete it. And you can see the main is still holding 4 items, but this one, I just deleted one and overrid it. And it's still going to work in the exact same way. I can just hide and show it. I do need to override the drop-down text. That's something the team is working on, being able to push those overrides through states. But just like that, I've got an auto-animated drop-down menu that I can use. And you can see, because I set up that padding, this box is just going to keep resizing. So it's very accommodating to different options. Any questions? Spider roll. No idea what that is, but I will be looking it up. Oh, now I'm hungry.
It's a very good sushi.
Okay. And so we've kind of talked about auto animate through a lot of this. Almost giving a teaser here. But I just want to show another little example here with iOS. So here we have a list of messages. I can tap on this. Oh, let's give it a, there you go. So you can see there's a little bit of motion here when I click. And the way I've set up my layers, I've actually included the next page on this page. I'll show you that in a sec, just so that it has a starting and end position. So when I click on Steven's name, his message kind of slides in. And then I can do things like tap on this and the keyboard just slides up. I can drag it. In theory, I can drag it down. I broke it. But I can also drag back on this. So just like the swiping motions on an iOS app, I can drag this back, and you can see I've kind of set up the interface elements to slide out of the way, and then the messages just dissolve going back. So these are some of the things you can do with auto animate. You can really create some cool effects. And so all I did there, you can see the messages, including the scroll group, are included in there. And so if you didn't notice, here I can't scroll. As soon as I go into my messages and they're cut off, I now have this scrolling area built into my message app. So you just add more interactivity. and realism to your prototypes by doing that. Rather than this just being a static image, you can build all of these to be components with a little swipe to see time, all that stuff. I didn't have time to do that. But I want to come back to our masking conversation here and just show, kind of maybe inspire some of the other ideas that you can use auto animate for. And so rather than position and size, like those are pretty straightforward things where you're going from one artboard to another. What you can also do though is animate masks. So if you're trying to create a cool background, maybe a hover effect, something like that, you can use auto animate. And actually we'll just make a hover effect on this. So I'm going to make this a component and add a hover state. And I've been doing this recently on some tutorials just to show like card hover, where you zoom in on an image. Isn't the exact context, but it'll work. So here we have our default and our hover. In the hover state, I'm just double clicking on that mask. And I want to kind of zoom in or zoom out on the image when I hover. So I like to hold Option and Shift as I resize. It just locks things in and resizes everything. That is one that is, I think, the same as Sketch. So I'll just bring this image right down so that it's at the boundaries of the text mask. And clicking on that, you can see the image has changed. It's kind of rough when I do it this way. But now if I play this and just mouse over, you can see the image is going to resize. So picture that on a card, an icon like we showed with the little trash can. These are the different interactions you can create. And then it works even with crazy paths. So if I copy and paste this, I'm going to delete that, the whole thing. And we're just going to grab a path. And the thing to keep in mind, it's probably best, I think it will work even if you don't have the same points, but it's best to just maintain the same number of points in your vector path. And if you double click, you can bend them. So here we have a random shape. And let's go with movies because I'm hungry now. Oops.
It's because of that sushi, Matt.
Yeah, it is. As soon as I saw spider roll, my brain started working. So here we have a masked image. It's kind of like a half-done Batman logo almost. What we can do is I'm just going to duplicate the artboard and we'll do an artboard to artboard animation. So I'm going to set that up so that when I click on it, it's going to auto animate there. And when I click back, it'll come back. So simple back and forth animation. But what we can do in design mode is we can come in here and actually just start manipulating the path. So we're not limited to just basic shapes. If I start curving this, I'm just going to really make this crazy different. Maybe we'll, oops, I added one. We'll see how that works. Let's see if I'm right. And we can just manipulate this a little bit, twist and turn it. Really get a cool shape. So now it's a bird. These are so incidental. Cool. I just drew a bird and we're going to see if it can go from bat to bird. And so when I click on it, you're going to see just like that, the whole path is going to shift and create a really cool animation. And I think I just shifted too. I think I'm ready to dance. So just like that, you can move paths. And this is so basic, but think about this as like, you can hide and show elements behind a mask. You can slide a whole scroll group in and out of a mask. You can do some really crazy stuff once you know what you want. Masking can really help you achieve that. And then we have a bit of time, so I'm going to dive into something we didn't spend a lot of time on last time in 3D transforms. So at Max last year in October, we launched 3D transforms, which is really cool once you get to play with it and see what you can do. And I at first was a little skeptical about it. I was like, why do I need 3D transforms? And then as you dig in, there's actually a lot of interfaces that have these elements, whether they're subtle or not so subtle. Anything with tvOS, the new iOS has a lot of this, but even just bringing elements forward and backwards. An early version of the mapping interface and the scrolling that I had, I had a zoom on it. And now 3D transforms can essentially let me zoom an element because I have control over the Z index, if you're familiar with that in code. So here, to start really basic, I have 3 elements. And there's a couple different ways I can work with them. To start, I need to turn on the transform button or the tesseract up on the right. Command T will work. So I can just toggle that on. And once that's on, you'll see all my elements have this gizmo, and that is what we call it. That's the technical term. It's the gizmo. And so I can easily jump in, grab an axis, and just twist an element in space on any of them, just like that. And if I leave it flat, you can see all of these share the same Z index down here in the right. If I adjust one, I can pull it forwards and backwards in space. You can see the Z index is going to adjust. So I can easily pull it forward and kind of overlap it on a card, or slide it back and put it behind the other card. So I now have this kind of control over depth. And if I undo that, so I can do that. I can select all 3 objects and get this gizmo and give them all the same controls. So if I want to create kind of a sliding stack of cards, I can do that and just adjust them over. Sometimes you need to play with the Z index, but I can also group that. So as soon as I group those 3 elements, now I have one object, and now I'm changing it in a different way. So I can create cards going along in an augmented reality platform. So here, let's see if I turn on the scroll group. We're going to go 3D and prototype all in one. So now I'm going to twist this, slide it off to my screen, and hit play. And because it's a horizontal scroll area, I can just mouse over and prototype right in 3D space. So if you're prototyping an AR, VR app, you now have control to add some dimension and perspective to your designs. So to show you that, I have a few different examples. Here is a little heads up display car dashboard for CarPlay. And I can just kind of swipe through it, unless I broke the links, which I did just copy this in from somewhere else. You know what? No need to mess around. Let's jump into it. So it's also great for showcasing your work. You can paste in content and then easily kind of manipulate it in a stage. But here, if we play this, I've got a scroll group going horizontally with all my apps, so I can scroll through them. And then I can even click on them in another prototype. Here, I can now use auto animate in that 3D space. So I not only have the scroll groups, but I can also include a click action here to open up an app and see that in action. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty simple. Here's a more realistic example. So it's over here. The iOS notification bar on your home screen, which many of you probably have in front of you, uses 3D space and transforms as well. So that nice stack feature of notifications that you get, it's actually all changing the Z index of those notifications. So when I click on it, I can expand out, and you can see that top card just kind of fell back into space. When I click on it, it pulls forward and it goes back. Super subtle, but not something you are able to do without 3D transforms. Another iOS example. This is a time trigger between a few different artboards where kind of a widget position is changing and previewing what the widget looks like. So if you go edit your home screen, edit widgets, you'll probably see something just like this. And then here it is in a gallery view. So as I swipe, I'm just using a drag trigger between two artboards. And what I can do, I can make this a little bit more extreme and really twist this around. And so from position one, I have a certain angle of rotation. And then in the next, I've changed it more. So now as I twist, it's hard to see it, but it is twisting a little bit on you and kind of changing perspective as you drag it back and forth. And is it the same thing? That's the same example. So those are some pretty cool examples. Here's the 3 cards animated. So again, auto animate works with 3D transforms as well. E-commerce products for sure. Lots of opportunity. And this is an intro flow I did for the article itself, if it works. Okay, I lied. I didn't have that linked. But where these cards just kind of dropped. So let's see if I can link this up. Tap, auto animate. Ignore me. Check your demos before you do them. So that's 3D transforms. Lots of cool stuff you can do there. Howard Pinsky has some great stuff on Let's XD covering 3D transforms as well. And yeah, you'll find different ways where you can use them really subtly, even for forward and back. So any kind of cascading card, like the old Finder view where it was a nice gallery of images, a lot of cool stuff you can do and great for presentations. So with that, I want to save the 20 minutes for questions. I'll start with the exporting high quality files. So exporting, there's a couple ways to do it. The best way, I'll just make this an export. So if I take this element, I can mark things for export using this little icon. And that's really going to allow me to bulk export and send to devs when I'm sharing out designs with them. But if I just have a single element, I can use export select. And right now, the images are design in various different formats, web, and this allows me to export 1x and 2x. And then I have iOS and Android options as well. So sure you have specifics on what you mean for high quality, but usually what I do is I make sure the artboard is in a nice 1x size, so a good crisp one. And then I usually export my 2x as well and use that for my really sharp images, just to make sure they're as high resolution as I can get them. I would like some more export options. I won't lie on that. But there are ways around it by exporting like that. And if you need really, if you need a lot more control, you can always move assets if they're vector over to Illustrator and export them that way. But this 2x thing, I think a lot of people miss, and that's going to give you a better quality image generally. Yeah, 2x is, well, 2 times the 1x. So it's for web, for when like Retina designs came in. If you're designing in your 1920 by 1080 view, essentially that's going to export it at 2 times that 20. I'm not good at math, but 2 times 1920 by 1080. So that as it's resized down, it's got more pixels per inch that it's displayed basically. Which makes it a sharper image in the same space as the 1x. And I mean, we have 15 minutes. I tried to capture a variety of things. We didn't go too in depth. Not sure if we're doing another session or not, but if we do, we can go even more in depth. So I'd love to hear different things that you would like to see. If there's some kind of more advanced things you want to figure out how to do, if we can do them, I might do them here live. So don't shy away. If there's anything you'd like to see us go deeper on, understand the mechanics of more, I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. If there's anything that we covered that you want to see in more detail. Yeah, good question, Max. So when 3D Transforms launched, there were some limitations to the implementation. So hover states right now, or component states, 3D transforms don't work the way other things do at the moment, just because of some technical limitations. So it's nothing you're doing wrong. I assume you're trying to transform something in a hover state and it's just not working. So what happens in a component state when you transform it is it will transform, but it just applies it to all states. So you can't have different transformations for each state yet. So that's a bit of a bummer, but it does work artboard to artboard. So that's why you can see most of my 3D transforms work is not in components, or none of it's in components. You can still use it in components and transform a component, but it's not going to work state to state. So if you had the same component on two different artboards, you can transform that component, but it won't go at a state level. The bus map looking thing. Yes. That's awesome. I'm going to rename it. So this was another tutorial I think might be available on Let's XD. If not, it will be. And so this was just basically how do you take kind of a admin panel like this and include a scrolling map. So if we back out, you can see I have a scroll group all around it. I'm going to turn off the Tesseract. I've got 4 handles now because I use this horizontal and vertical scroll. I wish they just called it pan. It's just a panning mode, basically. So it allows me to scroll horizontally and vertically and drag something around with a mouse. So it's pretty simple. Like the sidebar is just a sidebar. This is a really basic table, but you could apply that scrolling effect like we saw on the dashboard. And then this is a giant map. So it's basically just cropped by the scroll group with all my elements. So it's one group that I built outside of this UI and then copied it in and gave it a scroll group to match its area. So if I undo that scroll group, I can just pull this out and then work on it. And so this is a series of paths, which now you can actually animate these paths. Technically, it won't work right now because they're not in component states or anything. But you can actually auto animate strokes and dash, like the dash and gap functionality to make it look like a line is growing. That just came out this month. But what I have here is I have a couple of components, little addresses that I can override, and then a marker. So I have different versions for this. So when it's selected, when it's hovered, I have that all built into a component state. And so that's why when you saw me play it, it all hovered. And that's really all it is. I've just added elements over top of a map. You can generate these in, I'm going to blank on it. One of the map applications, you can style your own map, just export a giant image, really high res, and then work with that. And then you just copy, you drag it over, kind of position it. I try and center it, but you're going to want to center it roughly to the context it'll be in, and then apply that scroll group, and then just snap things. You can see it snaps to the edges of elements, and then you can just drag it around, and all your hovers work. I didn't wire up the selected state though. brand changed their logo. Could you replace that default and have it update across the prototype? Yeah. So there's a few really handy things, both color, character styles, which I think we covered last time. But in your assets panel, if you build a component with a logo, for instance, so let's just say, let's pretend the Apple Pay icon was a logo. I can easily come in, actually, I'm going to unlink that. Just make it a local one. So that's the main. And I'm just going to copy in an instance so that you can see it change. But where'd it go? There it is. So here we have the main component. So you can pretend that this Apple one is a logo. I would recommend making that an icon. So using your components, I said icon, I meant component. Make your logo a component. That way, as you make changes to it, it's going to apply anywhere there's an instance of it. And even if you've overridden it, you can reset that override pretty easily. So here, this is a main. If I just make this icon a component, why can't I do that? Weird. Okay. Make your logo a component, and then, yeah, you just update it in one spot, and it'll propagate everywhere it's used. I don't know why that's not letting me make a component.
Hey, Matt, just out of curiosity, do you have any Adobe XD extensions that you can recommend for any of us? Like, for example, if we're doing a map, we want to do like a live map of a city. Are there any, extensions that we can use that could be used in Adobe XD?
Yep. So plugins are a great place to look. Fancy Maps is probably the most recent one. So it just works. If I have a fill, I can choose a surprise destination. So you can set a zoom level, set a theme, and then just apply it to a shape. So that's one way to do it.
Oh, nice.
All right. That's a weird zoom level. But yeah, once you set it, it's probably how I set it. If you back out, you can apply that map and then it'll go in. I personally just like to use screenshots of Google Maps, but I have a big screen, so I can do it a little bit easier. But this is a great way to just prototype with it. There's another one, I think, but it's older and I'm not sure if it's still supported.
Oh, nice. I like that you can easily just look for the plugins on your on the left side.
Yeah, and if you want to discover things, there's a number of different collections now. So if you're looking for different extensions, they're all here. There's even, if you're coming from Sketch, there's a popular Sketch plugins. There's something for copywriting and localizing, testing and usability. And so we just have them all kind of categorized here.
Even better. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no problem. And yes, Mapbox was what I was looking at. All right. But yeah, I can come back to that, Morgan, in a second. Yellow lines are just paths. I think we're covered there. Are there any plans for XD to include gradients in borders or the ability to add multiple fill and border layers to an object? Yeah, so those are things I miss as well. The team is aware of them. And if you haven't been, I can find the user voice link, or somebody else can. There's just an Adobe XD user voice. And I highly recommend going there and voting on features you want to see. You can see everything that's been requested. And our product management team looks at that and factors that into their product planning. So definitely recommend going and vote. And please vote on that one a bunch because I want to see that. There are ways around. No, there's no ways around the gradient borders, unfortunately. Yeah, unless you stack layers on top. So you have a slightly narrower fill and then a slightly wider fill. That's kind of a way around it. But at this point, no multi-fill in borders. Hopefully coming.
Oh, I know you mentioned that we can vote, which is actually great because any recommendations, features that we would like. But just out of curiosity, would you be able to share any 2021 Adobe XD features that may be coming up pretty soon that's already in line?
Probably not. Yeah, probably not, and definitely not on a recording. But I can probably say that the team is definitely looking at prototyping a lot and how we can keep improving prototyping. There is some improvements to organization
Okay.
of certain things. So stay tuned. There is a good amount of stuff coming and some pretty cool stuff, but you'll have to wait and see.
I just had to ask.
You have to, yeah. I get it. So then going back, let's see. This is for everybody, right? Yeah. So if I was to reduce it to a sentence, what is my favorite feature about XD that other prototyping software does not have? So for me, sentence. I have to think about this. How long of a sentence? Yeah, so I think for me, the thing with XD has always been my ability to really iterate quickly and express ideas in an efficient way, not just fast, like efficient and effective. So the main features that help with that are component states that have prototyping built in, not just design variants. 3D transforms will be cool for augmented reality. I don't use it a ton yet. But just the fact that auto animate and component states are there, I can create micro interactions really simply. And then adding in scroll groups. I think scroll groups and component states are the ones I would have loved to have in previous jobs. Obviously auto animate as well, but I worked in like an entirely map-based application before and I couldn't do anything. So scroll groups is just a lifesaver for that. Hopefully there's a sentence in there. Yeah, everything. I like everything. A run-on sentence. Perfect. Yeah. Anything new? Oh, and then stacks and padding. Like that's a huge time saver too. Just for formatting the stuff you can build. I've built some pretty complex modules that all resize, and it's just so satisfying seeing you delete something and everything else just adjusts. That's really just awesome to see.
It
Yeah,
looks
there
like
you go, Max. Nice.
it looks like our time is almost up. We have 3 minutes before 5. I think we have time for one more question. If there's anyone want to ask anything. Oh, we do have
So
one.
we got a question on larger group collaboration. See if I word this correctly. Yes, probably down the line. That's definitely like the collaboration area is something the team is looking at. I don't know what or when. So I can't really answer that directly. But yeah, the team's definitely looking at collaboration pieces. There are some projects in the works, but I don't know exactly how that's going to address things or when. So that was a terrible answer, but that's all I can give you.
Well, that's a good enough answer, Matt. Thank you so
You're
much
welcome.
for that.
And definitely, if you have other questions or you think of things as you're working and you're like, oh, I want to know how to do that. If you're on Twitter, that's probably a quick way to get at me. You can email me too, but most of the product team responds to Adobe XD hashtags and mentions. And I never shy away from taking a little break and making a quick video to show you how things are done, or if you're stuck on something. So definitely reach out. And I'll also be posting all the guides and stuff that we produce too.